Hello, my name is Anthony Luscre, Kilo 8 Zulu Tango. This session is Successful Operating, Tools for Assessing Performance. This is my contact information. Today's presentation slideshow is available at tiny.cc/success-op, or you can shoot the QR code in this recording if you prefer. This will give you access to all the resources embedded in today's slideshow presentation. Can you hear me? Am I getting out? Can you hear me? Let's take a look at the ways to assess your station's effectiveness. This is the question that people always ask, am I getting out? So let's look at ways we can do that. First of all, what are the components of a successful operating station? There's 4 components necessary to be able to make contacts. The first is your station. Your radio, your feed line, your antennas are all part of this string. The second thing is your technique, your operating technique. The third one is propagation. That's the current band conditions. And the fourth one is the receiving stations on the other end. Of course, we have very little control over the receiving stations on the other end, and we have limited control of propagation. All we can simply do is choose a different time of day. But luckily, as amateur radio operators, we have a wide range of frequencies available. So sometimes we can make up for propagation by changing to a different band. Let's look at the components at our station first of all. In addition to your radio, antenna, and feed lines, there's some other accessories that can be very helpful for assessing your station's performance. A power or watt meter, often combined with an SWR meter, such as the case with this MFJ digital watt meter here. A field strength meter, an antenna analyzer, the monitor setting on your radio, or the station or a station monitoring scope, which was very popular years ago. I've put together some links today on using these various tools. First of all, a number of links on power watt meter SWRs. Again, anytime you see this serifed font in italics throughout the presentation in the different color, that means if you click on that, that is a link that takes you out to an outside resource. In this case, it's a YouTube video that takes you out to. And of course, we start off with advertisements, so we'll close that real quick. So again, all these links take you out to information on using a power watt meter SWR meter and how to choose one also. Here's a YouTube video on using an oscilloscope from W2AEW. Very helpful. He talks about making an interface and then using your oscilloscope to monitor your station. Again, that's an embedded video that you can click on to watch. Antenna analyzers come in a wide variety of sizes, shapes, and of course prices. Some of them are very simple to use, some are much more complex. Some are very inexpensive, some are rather expensive. So there's a number of them out there for you to choose from in the field of antenna analyzers. One of the things that's been very popular recently is something called the Nano VNA. These can be had for under $50 in many cases. They have a LCD display, and they let you do a number of things in addition to analyzing your antennas or your SWR. MFJ has a wide variety of antenna analyzers covering HF frequencies, in some cases VHF and UHF also. Rig Experts has a variety of models. These are all things that you can find out here. In addition to analyzing your antenna, these tools can also be used to check for losses with your coax. By using a known power source and a dummy load, we can measure the coax loss, and we can also check the coax using these tools by shorting the end of it. I have a number of links here on using antenna analyzers, both MFJ, the Rig Expert, and using the Nano VNAs for a variety of tasks. One of the other tools we can use for assessing performance is asking another ham, how do we sound? So finding a nearby ham friend can be very helpful. You want someone that's close enough that propagation is not going to matter a lot, so you can use them on any band, but you don't want them so close that you're going to overwhelm each other's signals. So across the street is definitely too close. A couple miles away is usually a good reasonable distance. Hams readily, if you don't have a friend available, you can look for other hams on the bands who are readily seeking contacts. So where do you find people that are listening for anyone out there? Well, nets are one place that you can do that. You can check into nets, and a lot of times they'll have a wide variety of people listening to the net, so you can find out how your signal sounds from a wide variety of locations. In a contest, there's lots of opportunities to make QSOs, but unfortunately, you're not going to get valid signal reports. So that'll let you know you're getting out, but it probably won't tell you how well you're getting out. CQing has the unfortunate thing that they may just not be interested in making a contact with you. So you could call CQ all day, and just because no one answers you doesn't mean your signal is not getting out. It just means that no one heard your signal that was interested in responding to it. That doesn't mean no one heard your signal. Having friends on a mailing list or text group or Discord, etc., are a great way to get in touch with people and have them listen for your signal when you want to test something. The on-the-air assistance of other hams could include adjusting your radio for best performance. On single sideband, having someone on the other end that can listen to your signal allows you to adjust your mic for your voice and your specific microphone on your radio. Adjust microphone gain, compression. Some radios have other audio settings for transmit, such as graphic equalizers. Here's an article called Reducing Splatter. It's from the On All Bands blog. It's a great resource, and you need to read that if you're using single sideband. Another one is Clean, Punchy, Competitive Audio Without Splatter. Again, these are all links with a special font here that you can click on and go out. And there's one here, sort of a funny one from Steve Katz called It's Not Your Microphone, It's You. So take a look at all these for information on optimizing your signal for single sideband with the assistance of another ham. On CW, some of the things you can do with the help of another ham is make sure your CW node is clean with no clicks. If your rig has a rise time setting for CW, make sure it is set no faster than 6 milliseconds. Setting it faster than that or lower than that amount of time will probably introduce key clicks and make you not a friend of other people on the band. Check to make sure you're not dropping elements. Dropped elements could often occur with poor keys, or sometimes it may be the case of having a excessive switchover time between receive and transmit. This is most common with you using an amplifier, and your station may not get all the information sent out over the air because of the switchover time involved. So you might drop a DIT at the beginning or end of your conversation. Some other ways to do on-air and online evaluation. I'll call this self-serve because you don't necessarily need another ham on the other end. These are automated ways that you can do it as long as you have an internet connection. These are all things that you can do. Beacons can be useful for evaluating receive only. You don't have to have an internet connection to do this. The beacons are listened to on the air, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but if you have internet capability, it allows you to see which beacon stations should be on. So it really doesn't even require you to be able to copy CW just to be able to hear it. We'll talk about the Reverse Beacon Network, or RBN. It's available for CW and RTTY. We'll talk about using FT8 and FT4 with PSK Reporter. We'll talk a little bit about WhisperNet, online spotting networks such as DX clusters, and then we'll talk about tunable online software-defined radios. So beacons are the first thing we want to talk about, and unfortunately they're useful only for checking your receive capability. They are not going to listen for you, you can only listen for them. So if you can hear them, that means that you're able to receive it, that means propagation is favorable, and your radio is operating properly. So the most common one is the NCDXF AIRU International Beacon Project. If we click on it, it'll take us out to that site, and you'll see that they're scattered around the world. If you go to the tools up here for tools for listening, it'll give you a transmission schedule showing you which station is currently transmitting on which band. They rotate every 10 seconds. So even if you can't copy CW, if you tune to 14.100 and you hear a station right now, that station is VE8 in Inuvik, Northwest Territories. So every 10 seconds these change, so you get an idea around the world. They also move down in bands. So if we're listening on a different band, you'll see that now the VE8 is on 17 meters, and in a few seconds it'll be on 15 meters, and then 12 meters, and so forth. So it gives us a chance to listen on the frequencies between 14 and 28. It's a great way to find out whether the bands are open and whether you're receiving signals. But again, it won't help you with your transmissions. So the beacons are a good thing about the beacons is they're always there. The bad thing is they're only good for helping you to receive, not for being able to listen to your signal. The Reverse Beacon Network, on the other hand, listens for stations and reports back what it's hearing. So it'll actually hear your station and give you an idea of where you're being received and how strong your signal is being received there. I have a link here that's really interesting on a short history of the reverse beacon network. I have a link here that takes you out to the reverse beacon network. And from here, you can go into the DX spots and find out a lot more information. We're not going to do that right now, but I'll talk a little bit about it. Basically, the way the RBN works, there's banks of software-defined radios at different locations around the world. They hear stations that are coming to them, and then they decode CW or RTTY stations using decoding software, such as the CW skimmer or the RTTY skimmer. This is a multi-stream CW decoding software that decodes all the stations in a big swath of the band. They then use aggregator software to receive spots from skimmers being telnetted from servers around the world. They're sent to the website for display. The Internet Aggregation Data Display site, which we just visited before, is called the Reverse Beacon Network site. Reverse beacon networks can also be used locally. Some contesting stations have them set up for them to listen to exclusively. When you're searching on the Reverse Beacon Network site, there's two ways to search. There's two simple ways that you can search for things. One is called DX. DX is the station being spotted. In other words, the station that is being heard and reported back. DE means the station doing the spotting. So if we want to find out whether a station's hearing signals around the world, we can choose DE and then put that station's call sign in, and we'll see all the stations they're hearing. So here's two examples. The DX option is used on the left, and here we're saying we want to see all the spots that heard K8ZT. So you see that we have a number of stations on the left here, TI7, KO7, W8, W3, KD7, etc. These are all stations that heard K8ZT. It says what frequency they heard them on, what the signal strength was, what the sending speed was approximately, and the time and date. On the right, we have an example using the DE option. In this case, I said I want to see all the stations that K3LR is hearing. So we choose K3LR as the DE option, and we see that KE3LR is hearing all of these different stations right now on all these different bands. And that gives me a good idea. He's about 50 miles away from me, so if he's hearing at the station, I probably can hear it also. So you can choose a DE that's close to you if you want to see if you're going to be able to hear it, or you can choose a DE that's far away and see what the propagation conditions are to that location. To get your signal heard by and spotted on the RBN, it's important that you follow a certain protocol. It listens for stations that are calling CQ or test. So send your call sign twice and then send a test after it, or a CQ after, and that should trigger the reverse beacon network to hear you and then spot you. Send everything at the same consistent speed, use proper spacing. If you're not comfortable sending with a straight key or a paddles, use a memory keyer. Even the one built into your radio can be a great way. So even if you're not a CW operator, you can still use the reverse beacon network by using putting the memory of your call sign into the CW memory of your radio and hitting a couple buttons, and that'll send it out. The reverse beacon network will hear you, and it will respond with the information on how strong your signal is. In addition to the original CQ, they've also added test, QRZ, field day, FD, SS for sweepstakes, NA for the sprints and some other contests, and up. Why would you want up? Well, for DX stations, of course, who are calling up. May not be sending CQ, they may be just saying up 5 or up 10, and giving their call sign. So that's a great way to pick those up. Here's an example of me checking my signal using the reverse beacon network DX option. So I did two tests here, test A and test B. I'm using 5 watts, which is what I typically run at my station, with my 3-element Yagi at 50 foot in the air, and I pointed it at 270 degrees. I transmitted then, and you'll see on 20 meters, all these stations heard me, and they gave a report here of different times and how strong my signal was there. I then did the same test using 5 watts in a 43-foot vertical. You notice there was a few less stations that heard me than with the beam. And then I can compare the signals with the beam versus the vertical. So you see ZF1 heard me much stronger on the beam. That's because I have some gain on the beam, over on the vertical. But TI7 heard me stronger on the vertical because the beam wasn't pointed in the direction that they were able to hear me easily. So it's a great way to test that information. I also wanted to see what bands were open. So I actually started at 10 meters and transmitted signals all the way down to 160 meters. I did skip 60 meters and I forgot to do 30 meters, so not all the bands were covered, but you see the bands were open all the way from 10 to 160 on March 3rd at 1900 Zulu, and you'll see what my signal strength reports were back from various stations. So this is using the DX option with K8CT plugged into it. Reverse beacon networks can be used to compare your signal with other stations through the spot analysis tool, and you can go through and use that. I'm not going to talk about that right now. You can also use something called ViewProp, which can be used along with the RBN, Reverse Beacon Network, to give you visual displays. You need to download the View Pro software, and you also need to have DX Atlas software to be able to do this. And there's a video here telling you about it. And we'll skip over that video for right now. Again, you can watch all these resources later by coming back to the slideshow presentation. Again, here's a number of resources on using Reverse Beacon Network, using it, CW Skimmer and Reverse Beacon Network at K3LR. And again, a lot of resources here for you to click on and follow through. You can also use the Reverse Beacon Network for POTA and SOTA spotting. You can also use it for CW organizations and groups. There's some special features on the Reverse Beacon Network, and I have information here on how to use those. Here's the example of the CW groups. You can choose which groups you want to see, and it'll give you an idea of when they're being shown on the Reverse Beacon Network. Now, just a reminder, the Reverse Beacon Network does not work for phone. There is no CW skim, there's no phone skimmer out there, just CW and RTTY skimmer, so there's no way to decode phone signals, at least yet. For FT8 and FT4, the most popular digital communication modes, we can use PSK Reporter. And PSK Reporter is a great way to see a visual display of what stations are hearing you around the world in different times, different signal strengths. You can look for your call sign, you can look for someone you know. And even if you don't use FT8 and FT4, you can use PSK Reporter as long as you know about a station in your area that uses these frequently. You can plug their call sign in and see where they're being heard, and that'll probably match the propagation for you to those different points in the world. I have a link here on using that for propagation tool. Whisper is a protocol designed for probing potential propagation paths. It uses very low power transmissions. The normal transmissions carry a station call sign, its grid square locator, and the transmitted power in dBms. So it's a great way to see where you're being heard around the world and to compare different stations. I have a link here for more information on WhisperNet. Here is an example of using WhisperNet, showing you a map graphically of the stations that are being heard at different places. Let's now talk about online tunable software-defined radios. These are radios that are on the internet that allow you to tune them as receivers, just as if you were sitting in front of a receiver in your shack. But the nice thing is you don't need to have a radio to be able to use these. You can go to these online software-defined radios. You can also choose one close to you if you want to hear what signals are like coming into your area, or you can choose one on the other side of the world. And the great thing about choosing one a little bit further away from you is you can actually listen for your own signal. So you can transmit on your radio and listen on a remote SDR without even having to ask a friend to do that. I have a quick start guide here for using the software defined radios online, and this is something I use with students in classrooms. A lot of times when I'm working with students for a day, I'll have a lot of different groups. I need to have something they can work on independently, and they all have computers or other tablets or devices, so I show them how to use these software defined radios, and they can then tune in stations. This short example here, about 4 pages, shows them how to use different types, gives them links to the software defined radios, talks a little bit about shortwave listening, frequency band charts, and then I even point out where the clusters are at so they can go out and find clusters and then listen for those stations on those frequencies. This is a great way to hand a young student something to play around for the day, but they can also take it home and use this at their house without having to have a shortwave radio or an antenna. So it's a great way if a student is interested in getting started. Here's my grandson Holden using his phone to tune in a software-defined radio station and listen. Also have this full slideshow here on using these software-defined radios and a video recording of that presentation. You can use online tunable SDRs to test multiple antennas. You can map antenna azimuth paths by choosing different software-defined radios around the world. You can find the multiple maximum usable frequency to different areas by using different radios. You can compare different radios, microphones, radio settings, etc., just as if you were asking someone to listen to you, but in this case, you can listen yourself by using a remotely tuned radio. You can also use software-defined radios in DXing. By using remote software SDRs, you can monitor stations answering the DX station while you're trying to work them with your main HF radio in your shack. And one of the great things is on the higher bands, and I forgot about this with the conditions changing, when you get on the higher bands, quite often you're not able to hear the stations that the DX station is hearing because they're too close to you. So by finding a station closer to where the DX station is, you can listen and hear what stations the DX station is hearing, and you can even find out where they're calling them. So it's a great way to find out where on the band someone is working at. And please don't use this secret to try and beat me out in DX power-ups, because it is very effective. I use a piece of software called VE3SUN DX Monitor. It's just a tool for bringing in DX cluster spots, but notice it's added now software-defined Kiwi radio, so you can actually listen when you see a spot in a lot of cases. Here's some information on using the Kiwi SDRs. So we've went through all this information on checking out your signal, using other people, using online tools, listening on beacons, etc., etc. But what happens if everything checks out and you're still not getting contacts? Well, then you need to think about your operating techniques. It could be as simple as maybe you have your RID on by mistake, or if it's FT8 and FT4, you have your time sync wrong. So make sure you check all those things. Then you need to check for equipment issues. Is there something wrong with your radio? Is it a software issue? Are band conditions just not that great? Or is something else going on? So don't get frustrated. Try and figure out what the problem is, but it can be frustrating, but you now know for sure that you've had ways of checking things out. If you're having problems getting through sometimes, it might be your technique. And a great way to improve your technique is by watching a presentation. I'm doing one at QSO today called How to Make That QSO Get in the Rhythm, Know the Rhythm, Rhyme, and Dance the Dance. It might already be over, but you can still watch the recording, or you can go to the slideshow at tiny.cc/r-r-d. I then have a few other slides here in the slide presentation, which I'm going to skip over, but they talk about pre-planning for success, how to make sure that you increase your chances, especially when you're operating portable, to go out and make a contact. And I'll let you go through these on your own. I also have some information here on space weather and propagation. I have a whole website on propagation and spotting tools, and notifying other people before you go out, online DX spotters and cluster tools, information on SOTA and POTA, DX maps for VHF, UHF users, grid master heat map for satellite users. I have a whole slide presentation on portable and field operations, packing for portable operations. And again, I'll make all those available to you by going to the slideshow at tiny.cc/success-op. My contact information, other presentations I have available, and now we'll go to questions. And while we're doing that, if you want to get this slideshow presentation, you can simply scan the QR code of this presentation. So again, thank you very much for watching the presentation, and now we'll start the question and answer portion of our QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo presentation. Thank you.
There we go. Hi, I'm Eric, 4Z1UG, and I'm going to introduce Anthony Luscre, K8ZT, for question and answers. If you have them, please put them in the chat on the right side of your screen, and I'll state the question and Anthony can answer.
It looks like I'm ghosting myself here on the screen. Thank you very much, Eric, for moderating today. It was great presenting at the QSO Today Expo. By the way, the presentation I mentioned near the end, getting in the rhythm, knowing the rhyme, and dancing the dance was available. It was presented yesterday, but the recording will be available soon, and you can watch that. Please go ahead and put any questions you might have in the Q&A in the chat, and I'll be happy to try and answer them.
Don't be shy. Okay, so I'll think of some questions here, Anthony, as I'm watching this presentation, which is absolutely amazing in terms of all of the resources that are available on the internet for monitoring your signal. Um, you mentioned that you let your grandson use his smartphone to actually listen to software-defined radios. How wide is that network in terms of what he's looking at when he's looking to listen to amateur radio or anything else?
Well, it's very interesting. He's 11 years old, and I work a lot with sixth through eighth grade students, fifth through eighth grade students, and many of them have never tuned a radio before. Anytime a physical radio, an online radio, etc., they're used to going to something like Spotify and having tunes played to them. So the whole idea of tuning in a radio and discovering things by moving the dial on the radio is just really a phenomenal experience for some of these kids. So the ability to give a kid a radio that is not only able to do all this, but is a high performance radio. If I would go out and buy a physical radio to listen to the shortwave bands, quite likely it would not have single sideband, so they would not be able to hear amateur radio talk. Even if it did have single sideband, the selectivity would be so poor on amateur bands that they might try for weeks to hear one contact. On these online software defined radios, if they go to the frequencies I've suggested, I almost guarantee that they will hear stations and they'll be able to listen to them. So every time I do this, I'm amazed at the response of the students. And this is an activity I do typically when I'm doing a full day session with a school group and I need an activity they can work on their own. So it works out really great. And there's hundreds of them out there. There's over 100 sites alone on the QSO SDR website, and then all the Kiwi radios around the world. So it looks like some questions are coming in here.
Yeah, so let me what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put them up and then I'm gonna restate them for people who might be just listening to this uh, demonstration. So I just want to say that Olaf W9FY says thanks, he enjoyed it. Margaret has a question. Let's put it up here. Please explain, show the grid master heat map. Is it just USA or worldwide?
Well, first of all, the grid system is used worldwide, and it's a way of identifying locations. It's called the Maidenhead grid system. So the underlying grid system is used for a lot of different purposes. The particular one I showed, the grid heat map, is something that mostly is used by satellite enthusiasts, mostly in the United States, but it is used around the world to work different grids. There's a limited number of satellites, so it's very easy to work each satellite, but by moving around and working different grids, it's a way to activate grids on VHF, UHF utilizing the satellites. So it is a special program, but the whole grid concept is a general concept. And if you go to my website and go to the introduction to contesting section, I have a whole link to materials on grid squares, finding your grid square, knowing what it is. So it's a great thing to know. So whenever you have to make an exchange in a contest, you'll know what your grid square is.
Okay, Bruce W0VET says, well done, informative and interesting. John KD3H says, this is great. Thank you for pulling it together. Can you talk about common gotchas and glitches, things you might see or hear, and the common problems that cause them?
Yeah, one of the most common things is we are not channelized for most of amateur radio, so we are dependent on tuning our radio into the particular frequency. Now, the other thing that happens is the station that is calling CQ might not be listening exactly on their own frequency. So you need to figure out where the stations are that that are being responded to, where they're calling. So it might be a little matter of tuning slightly above or below the signal of the station, knowing how to zero beat your radio. And in DX situations, when they're asking you to work up, find out where in that zone they're actually answering people. So the real big gotcha for most new operators is figuring out exactly where to transmit to have success. And that's something you learn over time. It's not something that, is necessary immediately easy, but the more you listen, and one of the suggestions I make a lot of times is we put a lot of stress on ourselves by trying to accomplish something like making that contact. But what you can do is spend some time listening and see how other people that are successful are doing it, and then you can mimic them. So, you know, spend some time listening and seeing how other people are effective as opposed to just calling all the time.
Okay, William K9GN says, lots of good info. We'll need more time offline to do some digesting. Thanks. Anthony, while you're here, can you say what Kumo Space Lounge you might be in so that if William wants to
Yes,
come and talk to you, that he can?
I'll be hanging out in the Rat Pack Kumo space. That's the last one on the list because they're alphabetical. So go to the Rat Pack Kumo space. I'll be hanging out there for the next hour after this at least. And I'd be happy to do that. And by the way, Will, I feel if I don't, William, I feel if I don't give you homework, I haven't done my job. So all my presentations always are full of links. So once you watch one of my presentations, you're required by amateur radio law to check out each of the individual links.
And if you recall the paper, which is part of this presentation, you'll find that this is about a day and a half worth of work if you do it properly.
Yes.
Okay, Stephen, AA8TJ says, please post the QR code and website again. I think we can do that. I think, can we do that? And
Yeah, I think we can.
back
Let's
it
try
up
to
a
see if
little
we can
bit.
bring it up here. Plug their call sign in and see where they're being heard, and that'll probably match
Jump
to the end. And now we'll
Can you
start
jump
the
to the
question
end?
and answer portion
There you
of
go. Let's
our
just
QSO today.
pause it.
There we go.
Okay, so whoa, what happened?
Uh,
Let me see
It
if I can.
decided to jump back to the beginning again.
I'm
It
going to
didn't
take it to
like me
the
going
end
to there.
here. Let's see if I can take it to the end.
Okay, go ahead. I'll let you handle it. I think we were both touching the controls at the same
Okay,
time.
so you do you want to handle it or do you want me to handle it?
Go
I'll
ahead.
take
It's
questions.
just a little beyond there.
Okay, let me just slide it over. We're in the back office here. There we go, right there. Okay, so there you go. Okay, next one.
And you can also get to that by going to tiny.cc/success dash. Well, actually, I don't remember what it is right now. I think it's success dash operate, but the QR code will work. And again, if you go to the links in the QSO Today Virtual Expo, there's a link to the PDF format of this, but I'd suggest you then click on the link in the PDF and go out to the live presentation because all my slide presentations are constantly being tweaked. I keep them in Google Slides, so if there's good questions today, I will go back and add that information to the slideshow. So what tools are you actually using to access propagation? I use a number of different things. I do use the SP, SNA, all the different numbers. Those are the geomagnetic numbers, etc. I look at the A and K quite a bit because those are the two things that really help a lot. Knowing how disturbed the bands are. If the K is very high, you can expect to have some issues on the lower bands. The SPI, the sunspot information, of course, will tell you when the higher bands are open. But we have a couple really great tools that give you even better indications than numbers because last week or about 3 weeks ago, you might have realized that the sunspot numbers shot up over 275. And what it was actually a geomagnetic disturbance. The band conditions were not great. They were definitely not open on the high bands, even though the sunspot number was very high. So I use things like PSK Reporter to keep a constant idea of what's going on. I can quickly look at that and see where my signals are getting out. And don't forget to call CQ every once in a while, too.
There you go. Sharon K0SEC asks, great presentation, lots of info. What would be the minimum apps for someone just starting out with FT8?
You need a radio capable of single sideband. It helps if it has a built-in sound card, but you can use an external sound card interface such as Signal Link or something similar to that. And you need a computer with software called WSJTX. I have a whole slideshow presentation available at tiny.cc/ft8ft4, and that'll get you all the information that you want on that topic. You can also go to my k8zt.com website, click on the link that has my presentations on it, and you can find not only the slide presentations, but in many cases recordings such as this.
I might add also that if you want to build something, QRP Labs makes a very nice little product for about $70 called the QDX, which is a digital mode transceiver, multiband. And
Yes, there's
if
one
you go,
working on my desktop, but I can't find it right now. I
well, you
moved a
have to
bunch
see
of things
Andy's. You
around.
have to see. You have to see Anthony's desktop to understand
Yes.
why you can't find it. But if you'll go to the QRP Labs booth in the exhibit hall, there's more information about the QDX there.
And
Okay.
again, I get some people that say I don't like to operate FT8. That doesn't mean you still can't use that PSK reporter. Click on that little link I have in the slideshow, and it'll tell you about how to use it as a propagation tool as opposed to just communicating on it.
Okay, so Johan is SE3X is thanking you. Really enjoyed it. 73 Johan, SE3X Sweden. How nice to have some Europeans on the QSO
Yes,
Today Virtual Ham Expo.
and I'm missing one of my favorite contests this year because, unfortunately, because of the political conditions, they're not holding the Scandinavian Activity Contest, which are two of my favorite weekends in the fall.
Olaf W9FY asks, can the FT8/4 be able to see my first skip zone? PSK Reporter or Need Whisper?
You should be able to do it on FT8 and FT4. Now, of course, on both of these, it depends on what stations are out there listening. And there are a number of whisper monitoring stations around the world, but with the number of people on FT8 and FT4, there's even more potential people to hear your signal on FT8 and FT4 than whisper.
Steve W0TNT, outstanding presentation. Thanks for all the links.
You're
That's
very
what I
welcome.
told Anthony backstage on the chat was outstanding presentation. Thanks for all the links. Jim WB2ZOP. Great presentation, Anthony. Very comprehensive and excellent resource for references. Your slides are a keeper. Thanks.
Well,
You
thank
don't
you. I
mind,
try and
Anthony? We'll praise Anthony here publicly because he really does an outstanding job putting these presentations together. Andy G8VY VYO, very full of content. I found that you do have to combine aspects like weather, time of day, and how many recipients are likely to be active to understand how well you're really getting out. What do you think about
yes,
that?
and by the way, I'm part of the Rat Pack group, and Dennis Kidder and I are going to be doing a series called Introduction to HF starting in October. It'll be 3 Wednesday evenings in October, and we're going to, in one of those, the first one, we're going to talk about the various HF bands and the characteristics of the bands. And one of the things I like to say about the HF bands is each band has its own personality, but each band also has its own mood depending on the solar conditions, the time of year, the time of day, etc. So it is a moving target that we're lucky as amateur radio operators to have all these different possibilities, but it means we have to figure out a way to monitor each of those.
Tim, KE7TAC, use QRZ to enter call sign K8ZT and you'll discover a list of presentations. Absolutely, great idea. Stephen,
by the way,
yeah, go ahead.
Just let me mention, all the presentations are available for your local club. If you'd like me to do a remote session, I'm working on something called Present All States. I've got about 35 states presented, done about 250 presentations since the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So I'd be happy to present for your club on one of the topics.
And I might say parenthetically, almost all of the presenters on the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo are also available to speak to your club if you ask them. I'm sure that they would be greatly. I can't think of the word I want, but I'm sure that they
Honored.
would love to do
We
it.
would be honored.
Honored to do it. Yes, and it's a great way for me in Israel. If I want to have a meeting of the Jerusalem Amateur Radio Club, it's nice to be able to have somebody come in to give a presentation of this caliber, especially if you've got a very tiny club and you don't have that expertise readily available. Travis, N3YLI, I look forward to perusing your links. Thanks for taking the time to put these together. Mark, W0QL, this is a talk and a site to go back to and study, to do some digesting. It's great. Thank you very much, Anthony. I hope you guys don't mind my reading these. Okay, do we have any more questions?
They haven't tried to stump me yet. I want something tough.
Yeah, we want a hard question here. It's the praise is amazing, but we want a hard question.
By the way, I'll just tell them a little bit about me real quick. My favorite thing in amateur radio is operating. I enjoy the technical aspects of the hobby somewhat, and I do build a few things and I do things, but I love operating. And this next month, I will pass the 105,000 QSO mark since I started on HF in 1983. And about 98% of that is 5 watts or less. I at 326 countries worked, about 317 confirmed, and the main trick that I have is getting on the air and using all bands and all modes. So please, if you're not on some of the bands, try them out. If you're not using all the modes, try them out. Fall is a great time to gear up your amateur radio with the number of contests coming up. Even if you're not a competitive person, get in the contest. People want to work you. You don't have to send in a log. You don't even have to worry about copying their exchange. As long as you can give them the exchange they're expecting, they'd be happy to have a contact with you.
I was going to say that one of my interesting takeaways, Anthony, was when you're talking about preloading some test CW messages into your rig, like I have a 7300, and using CW Skimmer to actually see who's hearing your messages. So you may not want to have a QSO because you're testing your antenna, but I thought that was really a keeper for me.
And Dave Castle, KE0OG, has a link that I have in my slideshow presentation where he talks specifically about loading the memories of the 7300 to do the RBN network. So he has a very detailed how to do, and his videos, as usual, are always very informative.
Okay, we have a new question. Peter, N1 CEO, says, are there any special considerations for VHF operation?
There are some, and one of the first is many of these tools are not really effective if you're looking at a wide swath. So for example, if I'm looking at a standard DX cluster, I'll be seeing spots that I quite often can't work because sometimes on VHF, UHF, a couple 100 miles may make the difference, whereas on HF, that's usually not the case. So that's one of the first things. But the other thing that happens on VHF, UHF is we don't have that PSK background out there to be able to do it. Now, if you'll notice, we're getting more and more 6-meter activity, and I think a lot of that is due to FT8 activity. A lot of people think 6 is dead all the time, but believe me, every morning I start off when I open my email by opening up WSJTX, going to 6 meters and seeing if anyone's there. And I almost always hear someone, even though people think the band is dead. So that is a consideration for VHF, UHF. The VHF maps is the place you're going to want to check out because those guys do a great job of showing you when openings occur. And I've seen that a number of times. And if you jump on quickly, you might catch some anormal propagation modes on 2 meters, such as tropospheric ducting and things of that nature. So yes, you do want to watch those things. And a lot of people for years used to use a television set tuned to an unused channel to watch for VHF openings on 6 because they are very similar in frequency. Keep a window open with PSK Reporter set on 6 and a radio set on 6, and you'll get a quick indication when 6 meters opens up.
Okay, David, KB3 RIJ wants to thank you. Very interesting. Jim, WB2ZOP, says, please repeat what you were doing, HF in October. How do we access it? Thanks.
Yes, let me go ahead and bring that up here real quick. Just give me 1 second here to get that on my screen. The link is tiny.cc /ratpac, RATPAC -list. And I'll bring that up on the screen. I'll do a screen share here. So this is the RatPac list, and we have presentations every Tuesday and Wednesday evening. Coming up in October, as you'll see here, October 12th at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central Time, Pacific Time, you can go to a live Zoom presentation by myself and Dennis Kidder, W6. That should be W6 DQ, not W8. That's a mistake there. I'll fix that later. You just click on this link here, right, and it'll take you to the Zoom site. If it asks you for a password, the password is Wednesday, all capital letters. But again, by going to this site right here, tiny.cc /ratpack-list, or going to the Ratpack website at www.ratpack.us, you can get all the information for the Ratpack programs. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in July of this year, Marty Wold, N6VI, and myself did the same thing on VHF UHF. We had 3 nights of beginner's night to VHF UHF, July 6th, 13th, and 20th. These are all recorded, available as YouTube videos that you can watch, and they're about an hour long each. So that's the activity coming up with that. And again, if you stop by the Ratpack Kumu space, if I'm not there, there'll be someone from the planning committee there that'd be happy to talk to you about the Ratpack programs. And the slideshow is, Dennis and I have been putting the slideshow together for the last month, and it's great fun to work together on a shared slideshow. We've been using Google Slides, which I do for all my slideshow presentations, and we connect up on Zoom, and we actually both work in the slideshow presentation at the same time.
Next question. John KD3H asks, in a contest, I see a lot of splatter from an operator a quarter mile away. Without contacting them, using only my waterfall and I'm a spectrum analyzer, how do I diagnose what's causing his splatter?
Well, first of all, it might not be his splatter. It might be your radio. Whenever you start talking about radios getting that close together, most of the radio engineers, when they design radios, don't consider the fact that we're going to put 2 radios in a close space. So quite often at field day, you probably had this occasion where, oh, everyone's interfering with me. Well, it's not really necessarily that they're doing it maliciously, or if there's something wrong with the radio. It's just amateur radios are not designed to be working in the same area with close-in signals. Now, there is a circumstance where we definitely do that, and that's at contesting stations. So they take a lot of precautions to avoid that by using stubs and filters and things of that nature. So it could be a problem with their signal, but it could also be just a problem that your fundamentally radio is getting overloaded. So before you accuse them, make sure, it could be your end of things. And I have friends that live fairly close to me, and I always kid the one gentleman, I can always make a contact with him by just disconnecting my antenna, and then he's the only station on my radio. And during contests, we will often hear each other, especially during VHF, UHF contests on 6. We always end up splattering over each other. They may be running a lot of power. I'm running 5 watts here, so I tend to not interfere with people quite as much, maybe, but when you're in close, it's a problem anyway, so I can't diagnose that for sure. But if they are really having a problem, what you can do is listen on some software-defined radios and go out a little bit further away from you and see if you're still hearing the splattering going on. In that case, it may be a problem with their signal. One of the really common problems is key clicks on CW, and that comes from people tuning down their switchover time to below 6 milliseconds. If you get your switchover time set too fast, you will generate key splatter.
Okay. Steve
Yes.
W0. Oh.
I love portable operation. Oh, any tips for portable operation? I love portable operating. One of the things I've found over the years is the most frustrating thing about a portable operation is when you forget something you need to have with you. So over the years, I've developed a couple techniques to improve my portable operating. One is I try and set up my portable station at home away from my shack, maybe either out on the patio or in a separate table, set everything up, get everything hooked up, tuned in, and make a contact. Once I do that, I shut everything off and pack it before I move it. That way, everything that was required to make the contact, including the interface to the computer to log it, were all in one place. So a checklist is great, and I do have some checklists, but my final checklist is actually putting everything together and packing it in suit right there where it was at, next to each other, and operating, and then hopefully I get everything with me. You can still forget things. So I have a whole presentation on portable operations. It's at tiny.cc/portop, PORTOPT. And in there, I have a whole detailed multiple slides about the preparation and packing part and tips for portable operations. There's a whole thing about the, I think it's Navy or Marines. It always says uh, one is never enough. Two is means one. Basically, they always have a replacement for everything. And I've taken that a little bit further, and sometimes you can't have two of everything, but if it's really critical, you might want to consider having two. So when I go out and do something like, my wife and I always travel for field day. So we are going to a distant location, sometimes by train, sometimes by car, sometimes by plane, and I don't have a chance to get any equipment at that point in time. So I do bring two radios with me because that's the one thing I can't get around fixing in the field necessarily. So I do have a second radio with me. Because I'm operating QRP and because I use small radios, it isn't very inconvenient for me to do that. But also having things that serve multiple purposes, like if I'm operating in the field, I always make sure I have two antennas with me and that at least one of those antennas can operate on multiple bands. That way, if I get stuck with a band being dead, I can still operate on a different band. I remember doing a demonstration for a number of schools at a school one time, and the propagation conditions were absolutely horrible, and I could not make a contact on 40, a single sideband contact. Fortunately, I had my computer with me. I was able to hook up my FT8 and make an FT8 contact. And you know what? They were just as satisfied with that because they did not know what kind of contact I was going to make. But the end result was it wasn't a failure. I did make a contact. So contingencies are very important in portable operations.
Okay. Kathy, KA0RTB, says, this has really cleared up a lot of my questions on these tools. Thanks. Johan is back. What is the best tool to use to not miss when P5 comes on the air? PSK Reporter or RBN? Johan,
I would use when the P5 comes on, I'd be listening to all the tools that are available, but don't do it until after I make my first contact. So please wait for me first, and then you can do anything you want. But yes, I think what you'll see what happens on a valid P5 operation. I don't think I don't think you'll have any problem finding out very quickly because word will spread very fast. The big problem is going to be at that point in time not knowing that they're on there, but getting through to them because of the crowd. So what I would suggest is start practicing now on other de-expeditions so that you really got your de-exing skills honed.
Okay, Peter, N1 CEO asks, do you have any favorite DX clusters? There are so many and it's difficult for me to decide which one to use.
You know, I use the VE3 SUN cluster tool. One of the main things though is whatever cluster you're using, make sure you have it set properly. In other words, you want to make sure that you're only seeing spots within a certain distance of your location. Because if you're seeing spotters from within a certain distance of your location. So if you're seeing spots made by a person in Europe and you're in the United States, that's not going to be very valuable. I would say anything over 1,000 kilometers is probably too far away from you. So you want to limit all the incoming spots from spotters that are close enough to you that there's a chance of hearing them. So that's one of the real important things. Also realize that a lot of the clusters have tools that you can turn on and off to filter incoming spots. So like if you're interested in working a CW contest, you can turn off all the incoming single sideband spots so you're not clouding, covering the screen up with them. You can even choose specific bands to see. Just remember to turn those filtering tools off afterward. It would be very disappointing when you're good to your general operations.
Okay, John, A85JD. Excellent presentations. So many tips to keep me busy for quite a while. Thank you. Same for me, John. John, KD3H. Excellent point. I should have said diagnosing the splatter. Mea culpa. But you did ask for a stumper.
Well, I hope I gave you some clues though. Either way, so if you have a noisy CW signal, please clean it up because you're interfering with me all the time. So yes.
Okay, folks, are there any last questions? If not, be sure to go to the Rat Pack Kumo Space Lounge and engage Anthony directly. Thank you so much for coming to the QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo and enjoying these presentations as much as I'm enjoying these presentations. And thank you, Anthony, for making 2 presentations in the expo this week.
Well, I think this is probably my, let's see, 5 times 2 plus 1. I think this is my 11th presentation over the 5 different ones. Actually, I think it's my 12th presentation. By the way, my favorite of all time, though, of all my presentations I did was the one I got to do with my wife last year in March on amateur radio and train. So if you want to watch me with a enjoyable presenter, you can join my wife K8ODP and I by watching the online video of that presentation.
Okay, I'm going to bring this one up and then we're going to close because it's a good point. Elizabeth says KJ0EUB. This may be too tough for Anthony. Would it be possible to speak just a little slower at the next presentation? I
That's
can't
why you
process the info as fast. But I want to tell you something, Elizabeth. All of these video players, you can slow down. So if you want to, if someone's speaking too fast, I do, then you can actually turn the speed down and you can enjoy it that way. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this presentation. And please join Anthony at the Rat Pack Kumo Space Lounge after.
And I do agree with Elizabeth. I speak way too fast, so that's why you need to have my wife here because she kicks me under the counter to slow me down. But I always have this. I always have this fear that I'm only going to meet with you one time, and I want to give you as much information as possible. So take advantage of that slow speed on your player. And matter of fact, my wife always kids me after I'm done with the presentation. She has to come in with a tranquilizer gun to shoot me to calm me down. So
okay, goodbye, everyone. 73.
73.